On June 27, 2002, the world of rock music was preparing for a historic return. The Who, one of the most influential bands in music history, was about to begin another major American tour. Fans were ready to experience the explosive energy that had defined the band for decades. But before the first note was ever played, tragedy struck. Inside room 658 of the Hard Rock Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas, John Entwistle, the legendary bassist of The Who, was found unresponsive. He was only 57 years old. The news shocked fans around the world. For decades, John Entwistle had been considered the strongest and most dependable member of The Who. While the band became famous for destroyed guitars, explosive performances, and unpredictable personalities, John remained calm and controlled. He was the quiet force holding everything together, but his death immediately created questions. Early reports focused on the discovery of cocaine in his system, leading many people to believe that his lifestyle had finally caught up with him. However, years later, a deeper truth emerged. The drug was not the real reason John Entwistle died. The real danger had been hidden inside him for years. His heart was already in serious trouble, and he had no idea. The man behind Thunderfingers. To millions of fans, John Entwistle was more than just a bassist. He was a musical force. During his career with The Who, he transformed the role of the bass guitar. At a time when bass players were usually expected to stay in the background, John pushed the instrument into the spotlight. His fingers moved with incredible speed and power, creating a sound that was almost impossible to ignore. That ability earned him the legendary nickname, Thunderfingers, but another nickname revealed a different side of his personality, the Ox. The name represented his toughness, endurance, and ability to survive the extreme lifestyle of rock and roll. John could handle situations that overwhelmed others. He was calm when chaos surrounded him. He was silent when everyone else was shouting. But behind that quiet personality was a musician whose talent changed rock music forever. A childhood born during war. John Alec Entwistle was born on October 9, 1944, in Hammersmith, London. His childhood began during one of the most difficult periods in British history. World War II was still raging, and London was constantly threatened by German bombing attacks. According to a family story, around the time John was born, an explosion occurred nearby during an air raid. Whether the story was completely accurate or partly legend, it became part of the mythology surrounding the future rock star. The boy who entered the world surrounded by explosions would eventually become famous for creating some of the loudest sounds in music history. John was the only child of Herbert Entwistle, a trumpet player, and Maud Entwistle. Music was already part of his family background, but his early home life was unstable. His parents' marriage collapsed shortly after his birth, and John spent much of his childhood living with his maternal grandparents. The experience shaped his personality. Unlike many future rock stars who searched for attention, John became private and reserved. He was a quiet child who often kept his thoughts to himself, but music gave him a way to express what he could not say. Discovering the power of music. From an early age, John showed unusual musical ability. When he was only 5 or 6 years old, his grandfather encouraged him to perform at a local club. The young boy would sing old songs while his grandfather collected money from the audience. It was a small beginning, but it introduced John to the feeling of performing. By the age of 7, he began learning piano. His early music lessons were unusual, but they helped build the foundation for his future career. Later, he moved toward other instruments, including trumpet and French horn. At school, John continued developing his musical skills and became one of the few young musicians with formal training. But his life changed completely when he met another student who shared his passion for music, a young guitarist named Pete Townshend. The two quickly became friends. Together, they created their first group, a traditional jazz band called the Confederates. The band only performed one known show, playing 2 instrumental songs for a small audience at a local church. Nobody knew it at the time, but this small beginning would eventually lead to one of the greatest rock bands in history, because John Entwistle and Pete Townshend were about to change music forever. After his first small experiment with music alongside Pete Townshend, John Entwistle was searching for something bigger. The traditional jazz sound he had explored was no longer enough. Like many young musicians of his generation, he was drawn toward the growing power of rock and roll, but finding his place in this new world was not easy. At first, John tried playing guitar. However, his unusually large fingers made it difficult for him to play the instrument the way he wanted. Instead of giving up, he searched for another solution. That solution was the bass guitar. At the time, the bass was considered a supporting instrument. The guitarist usually received the attention. The singer stood at the front of the stage. The drummer created the energy. The bass player simply kept the rhythm. But John Entwistle saw the instrument differently. He believed the bass could be aggressive. It could be powerful. It could become the foundation of an entire song. And he was determined to prove it. Creating his own bass guitar, John did not have enough money to purchase a professional bass guitar. So, like many determined young musicians, he created his own. Using a block of mahogany wood, he carefully carved an instrument inspired by the Fender Precision bass. He built the body, installed the wiring, and created a bass that matched his own playing style. It was not just an instrument, it was the beginning of a completely new sound. When John played, people noticed. His bass was louder and more aggressive than anything they had heard before. Eventually, his unique style attracted the attention of Roger Daltrey. At the time, Daltrey was the frontman of a band called the Detours. He had a reputation for being energetic, confident, and sometimes difficult. But when he heard John playing, he immediately recognized something special. He invited John to join the group. John agreed, but he had one condition. The band needed to replace their current guitarist with his friend Pete Townsend. Roger accepted, and that decision changed rock history. The three musicians, John Entwistle, Pete Townsend, and Roger Daltrey, formed the foundation of what would become The Who, the birth of a rock giant. In the beginning, The Who were just another young London band trying to survive. They played small clubs and searched for their identity, but they had something different. They were louder, more rebellious, more unpredictable, and John Entwistle was determined to make sure people heard them. During the early years of The Who, John became obsessed with increasing the power of his sound. He wanted an amplifier that could match the force of his playing. That search led him to a small music shop owned by an ambitious amplifier maker named Jim Marshall. Marshall was experimenting with creating equipment that could produce much more volume than traditional amplifiers. John became one of the first musicians to use Marshall's powerful new systems. The result was shocking. The bass became enormous. The sound filled entire rooms. According to Pete Townsend, John was already loud before using Marshall equipment, but after getting the new amplifier, he became almost impossible to compete with. Instead of turning down, the rest of The Who responded by buying more powerful equipment. Soon, the band was involved in a competition of volume. Every musician wanted to be louder than the others. This battle would eventually help change live rock performances forever. The Who were not just creating music, they were creating an experience. The song that changed everything, My Generation. By the mid-1960s, The Who were becoming one of Britain's most exciting bands. Their rebellious image connected with a new generation of young fans. Then came the song that would define them, My Generation. Released in 1965, the song became an anthem for young people who felt misunderstood. But one part of the recording made history, John Entwistle's explosive bass solo. At the time, bass solos were almost unheard of in rock music. The instrument was supposed to stay behind the guitar. John completely changed that idea. He pushed the bass forward and proved it could be just as exciting as any other instrument. Creating that famous sound required experimentation. John searched for the perfect tone. He tried different bass guitars and different strings. At one point, he used a Dane electro bass because he wanted a sharper, more aggressive sound, but the thin strings could not survive his powerful playing. He broke several sets while trying to record the perfect version. Eventually, he achieved the sound he wanted with a Fender Jazz bass. The final recording became one of the most recognizable bass performances in rock history. It was not just a solo, it was a statement. John Entwistle was telling the world that the bass guitar mattered. The dark humor of John Entwistle. Although John was known as a serious musician, he also had a strange and creative sense of humor. His songwriting style was completely different from Pete Townsend's. While Pete often wrote about youth, rebellion, and emotional struggles, John explored darker and stranger ideas. His first major composition, Whiskey Man, showed his unusual imagination, but his biggest songwriting success came from a conversation about something much smaller: a spider. During a night out with Rolling Stones bassist Bill Wyman, John and Bill began discussing why spiders frightened people. That simple conversation inspired John to write Boris the Spider. The song was unusual, it was creepy, it was humorous, it was unlike anything else The Who had released, yet fans loved it. Eventually, it became one of the band's most requested songs. It showed another side of John Entwistle. He was not just a powerful musician, he was an artist with a completely unique imagination. The Who conquer America. In 1967, The Who finally arrived in America. The British invasion had already introduced American audiences to bands from the United Kingdom, but The Who brought something different. They were louder, more aggressive, and impossible to predict. Their appearance at the legendary Monterey Pop Festival introduced them to a massive American audience. The festival featured some of the biggest names in music, including Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin. The Who wanted to prove themselves, and they delivered a performance people would never forget. At the end of My Generation, drummer Keith Moon destroyed his drum kit with explosives. Equipment flew across the stage. The audience watched in disbelief. But in the middle of the chaos stood John Entwistle, calm, expressionless, almost unaffected. It perfectly represented who he was. While everyone else created the storm, John was the steady force inside it. The world was beginning to understand that behind the Who's madness was a musician unlike anyone else. John Entwistle was becoming a legend. Love, marriage, and the private man behind the rock star. Unlike many musicians of his generation, John Entwistle never seemed interested in constantly chasing attention. He wanted something different. He wanted a private life away from the madness of touring. He wanted a place where he could escape from the noise of the music industry. In 1967, John married his childhood sweetheart, Alison Wise. Their relationship showed a completely different side of him. On stage, fans saw a powerful musician standing among the chaos of The Who. But away from the spotlight, John was much quieter. He enjoyed collecting unusual objects, spending time at home, and surrounding himself with things that fascinated him. His countryside home became a reflection of his personality. It was filled with rare guitars, historical items, artwork, and strange collections. It was not just a house. It was his personal world. Compared with the wild behavior of some of his bandmates, John appeared more controlled and mature. But even his calm personality could not protect him from the pressures of fame. Years of touring, the demands of the music business, and the unpredictable lifestyle surrounding The Who slowly created problems. Eventually, after years together, John and Alison's marriage began to break apart. The man who appeared so strong on stage was facing personal struggles away from the audience. The Forgotten Genius, one of John Entwistle's greatest frustrations, was not about fame. It was about recognition. Although he was an incredible musician and talented songwriter, many people only saw him as the bassist. They saw the instrument. They did not always see the artist behind it. Pete Townshend wrote many of The Who's biggest songs, and because of that, John's own compositions often received less attention. But John had his own creative voice. He wanted people to hear his ideas. He wanted to sing his own songs. He once explained that he could usually get only a couple of songs onto each Who album, but his frustration came from not being able to perform them himself. He did not want his music to simply exist in the background. He wanted his own identity. That desire eventually pushed him toward a new chapter, a solo career. In 1971, John Entwistle became the first member of The Who to release a solo album. The album, titled Smash Your Head Against the Wall, featured contributions from musicians including Keith Moon. It revealed a side of John that many fans had never seen. He was not simply the quiet bassist standing behind Roger Daltrey and Pete Townshend. He was a complete musician with his own ideas, humor, and creativity. Although the album did not become a major commercial success, that was never the main purpose. For John, it was about artistic freedom. It was about proving that there was more to him than just playing bass. The rock star lifestyle and financial pressure. As The Who became more successful, John enjoyed the rewards that came with fame. He developed expensive hobbies and became famous for collecting guitars, cars, and unusual objects. His collection grew larger and larger. His home became almost like a museum dedicated to his interests. But the same passion that made him creative also created problems. John had a reputation for spending money quickly. Instead of buying one item, he often bought several. Instead of collecting a few instruments, he built one of the most impressive private guitar collections in rock music. The lifestyle of a successful musician could be exciting, but maintaining that lifestyle required enormous amounts of money. Over time, financial pressure became another challenge in his life. Behind the image of the wealthy rock star was a man dealing with the complicated reality of fame, the loudest band on earth. Even while dealing with personal struggles, John Entwistle continued pushing musical boundaries. His obsession with volume became legendary. His bass equipment grew into a massive wall of amplifiers, speakers, and technology. The setup became so large that people jokingly called it Little Manhattan. But John had a simple reason for building such a huge system. He wanted to be heard. He once explained that he became frustrated when another musician could turn their guitar amplifier louder than his bass. So instead of lowering his volume, he increased it. That attitude perfectly represented John Entwistle. He was always searching for something bigger, something more powerful, something unforgettable. In 1976, The Who performed a concert in London that reached an incredible volume level of around 126 decibels. It became one of the loudest rock concerts ever recorded. The Who helped redefine live performances, and John Entwistle's powerful bass was one of the main reasons why. The loss of Keith Moon and a changing band. In 1978, tragedy struck The Who. Keith Moon, the legendary drummer whose wild personality had become part of the band's identity, died at only 32 years old. His loss changed everything. The Who continued with a new drummer, Kenny Jones, but the original chemistry was never the same. The unpredictable energy that once defined the band had disappeared. Still, John remained dedicated to the music. Decades after their beginnings, The Who received one of the highest honors in music. In 1990, they were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. For John, it was a remarkable moment. The young musician who once performed to a tiny church audience with Pete Townsend had become a permanent part of rock history. The final years and the hidden danger. By the 1990s, John Entwistle's life had changed dramatically. His second marriage to Maxine Harlow eventually ended. His financial struggles continued, but his reputation as one of the greatest bass players of all time remained untouched. Musicians admired him. Young bass players studied his technique. Fans celebrated his contribution to rock music, but behind the achievements, something dangerous was happening, something nobody knew about. John's heart was slowly deteriorating. The warning signs were hidden. The condition remained undiagnosed. And then came June 2002, the final night in Las Vegas. Just one day before The Who's scheduled American tour, John Entwistle arrived in Las Vegas. He checked into the Hard Rock Hotel and Casino. That evening seemed normal. Nobody knew it would be his final night. The next morning, John was found unconscious inside his hotel room. He was gone. The news shocked the music world. A legend had disappeared overnight. At first, attention focused on cocaine found in his system. Many people believed drugs were responsible for his death, but the truth was far more complicated. The truth behind John Entwistle's death. The medical investigation revealed that cocaine had placed additional stress on his body, but it was not the direct cause of death. The real problem was his heart. Doctors discovered severe coronary artery disease. One artery was completely blocked. Another was approximately 75% blocked. His heart had been struggling silently for years. According to those close to him, a medical examination might have revealed the danger earlier. A simple heart test could possibly have shown the warning signs, but that examination never happened. The man who spent his life creating thunder for millions had a heart that was quietly failing. The legacy of Thunderfingers. John Entwistle's legacy cannot be measured only through awards, records, or chart positions. He changed the way people viewed the bass guitar. He proved that a bassist could be powerful, a bassist could lead, A bassist could become unforgettable. He was the quiet member of The Who, but his music was impossible to ignore. Fans remember Pete Townshend's guitar. They remember Roger Daltrey's voice. They remember Keith Moon's unforgettable energy. But behind it all was John Entwistle, the foundation, the force, the thunder. His final night was tragic, but his music continues to live. Because John Entwistle may have left the stage in 2002, but Thunderfingers still echoes every time a bass guitar shakes the world.